which is a thing, you know, having a chat is one thing, but you know, hey, da la la.
They're doing a live online variety bill at the moment.
Yeah.
which Birdman's been on, and a whole lot of people have been on actually, and
Yeah,
that's quite.
that's what I did. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you did that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but how they get international guests to be bright at that hour of the night is quite challenging, I think.
Okay, I think we're on, are we?
Oh, recording. Yep.
Hi and welcome.
Hello, and welcome everyone to Clown Power Live session, the new one. With me, Sue Broadway. I'm hosting this, and Chris Lynam is talking about his life as a clown and his career to date.
Could take about 5 minutes.
Just before I hand over to Chris, I'd like to thank our supporters, Duncan Cameron, Frankie Anderson, Ricky Jackout, Piero Grandinetti, and Zandra for pledging a regular amount for ongoing support. And I urge you all who are here today to support Patreon through Zoological. So please go online and give, because we believe in the clown as the way forward for the future, and you should too, with your money. I'd like to start. Hello everyone, and hello Chris especially.
Hello, sir. Hi.
And I'd like to hand over to Chris now to talk about his history and your career from the early days, because I haven't seen you perform live, Chris, since really long time ago, when you were first starting out on the Mound at Edinburgh, I think. Wow. And doing a really, stand-up clown performance. It was really inspiring at the time, and it would be inspiring for everyone to hear you talk about your journey and how you got there.
Okay. I hope I can make it interesting and for you guys, because it has been interesting from my eyes, I tell you. So first of all, I'll tell you where a bit of the influence was. When I was a kid, we used to go to cinema on Saturday afternoons, and you'd get a ticket and a bag of crisps and everything. And it was invariably a Western that we'd go and see, but they have shorts beforehand, and it was either Laurel and Hardy, Buster Keaton, Chaplin. And so those kind of films were always, I'd watched them, so they'd sunk in. Then when I was 14, the second year, I went to work at the Luna Park for the school holidays to earn pocket money. I'd happened to be in the right time and place when two guys from the RAF, the Royal Air Force, this was in Rhodesia, it was called then, Zimbabwe now. And I got to be standing next to this guy when he said, oh, we need an assistant for our shows. And they were doing a fakir act, the two of them, sticking nails up your nose, swallowing swords, blowing fire, walking up razor sharp ladders and lying on a bed of nails. So I went, oh yeah, I'll do that. And so they taught me all that stuff. It just took an hour or so, actually. I mean, the sword swallowing I never really got to terms with, because that's quite a lot of work, sorting your gagging out. So it takes 4 or 6 months to get that together, I think. Anyway, so I did all those shows. I can embellish that period, but I won't right now, just if it gets, if we run out of time and it's not boring or something. You can remind me about being peeled off the bed of nails, if you like. So anyway, then I started traveling around Southern Africa for a couple of years, and then they wanted me to come join the army. So I had to come over to Europe, where the influence of music and what was going on here was pretty strong back there, and this is where I needed to be, really. So came over, carried on being a hippie. Great stories about getting houses and how I met Friends Roadshow. And then one morning I woke up and I went, I want to be a clown. that was it. And I just went for it from there. So the first thing was, oh, what do you do? So I looked for a school. The only school I came across was the Lecoq School in Paris, which I applied for and got given one of the 80 places from 3,000 applicants. But with the acceptance came a letter demanding the first year's fees, which was 2,000 francs, which was quite a bit of money then. Anyway, I spent a month trying to get it together and then went, nah, it's not going to happen. I was a hippie, you know. So I started just doing some tumbling workshops down at the Oval House. And after about a month, went out on the street and started trying, you know, built a tiny little show, 10-minute show, using some of the skills that I'd learned when I was a 14-year-old boy at a Luna Park. First show was really crap. I mean, it was just awful. But there was a spark enough there. No, probably because I was pissed as well. You know, I think I drank about 5 whiskeys to get on stage. Did all funny diamond makeup and all that la-di-da. And yeah, went back out and did another one. And then it kind of just grew from that. And I loved every minute. The happiest and wealthiest time of my life was the 15 years of just being a street performer. And then invariably you'd start getting invitations to come indoors, come to a festival, you know, come to my private party. And yeah, it's just kind of grown from that, really. And I've been very fortunate to have worked with some great artists, come across some great artists. I mean, the early street days have come gone. I was just talking to someone about that yesterday, and you know, Bookie Snackenberger were there, and that went on to become Stomp. You know, mad acts, Randolph the Remarkable and Captain J.J. Waller, and yeah, it's just so. Although I don't really play the street anymore, I sometimes get booked for street festivals. I love it. I think my heart is really as a street performer. It's the most honest and kind of easiest from a point. I mean, the only thing you've got to deal with is on the street is weather and authorities, really. Usually you can find a great location and you'll find an appreciative audience. Kind of changed now. That's the kind of romantic view of it. I think the streets become a lot more difficult with the onslaught of well, yeah, I suppose it's the digital world, and people just, it's not, the artistic content isn't as important, does it? The freedom of being new and fresh doesn't seem to be there. It's become very formulaic, I think, the street. But as has a lot of fringe theatre, I think. You know, just considering what the Edinburgh Festival was like in the 70s and the 80s, where there was a lot more experimental, alternative theatre, fringe theatre events. That, I mean, jeepers, we did The Warp. It was a 24-hour long play with Ken Campbell. We did that in Edinburgh for 5 shows, and you know, did up a whole theatre. 50 of us did up a derelict theatre to building regulation standards and put on 5 shows in this 24-hour long play. I mean, that stuff doesn't happen anymore. You know, it's become very kind of safe. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you talk about safety and how I think both of us came from a generation where it was possible to do stuff and we just went for it, didn't we, at that
Yes.
time, which was great. But I was really interested to hear you talk about the Friends Roadshow and your early influences and how that became you woke up one morning and thought you would be a clown. How did that happen? Was that because you'd seen someone clowning, or what were your influences and your teachers? How did you come to that conclusion? And
I think that's what my sort of prelude to that was all about, you know, that early days seeing Keaton being a kind of the naughty boy, you know, I was always in trouble. I mean, I think I held the record for being beaten at school by both, the prefects were allowed to beat us, the teachers were allowed to beat us, deputy heads were allowed to beat us, and the head. And I saw all of them very regularly. I mean, it was almost a daily occurrence. I get whacked on either my hand or my arse.
So So are you saying then, Chris, that your early influences to being a clown were because you were beaten as a boy? Is that what you're telling us?
Yes. Yes.
And I was interested in your story as well about trying to go to Le Coq in Paris and not raising the money. And therefore, did you have any training, or was it all?
The Oval House had there was a teacher doing tumbling workshops there, and I think Frankie Anderson took it over. But I was trying to rack my brains of what she was called, and she had a class, a workshop running in Covent Garden as well, just tumbling. So I did about a month of that, and then soon after I started, there was a really fantastic workshop festival organized at the Oval House by a man called Steve Whitson, who was kind of a lighting technician there. Him and his partner had this dream of putting on a workshop festival, and for a month. The Oval House was really innovative. In the early 70s, it was just the most phenomenal place. God, yeah. Feast of Fools. Oh, that was a memorable place. Emil Wolk was in that. He was on one of these the other night. And I think Nola might have been in it as well. Feast of Fools was like a medieval banquet kind of thing. The whole of the Oval House was taken over. Anyway, I digress. This festival that Steve organized had 12 hours a day of just phenomenal teachers. Will Spur from Holland, mine, Ken Campbell, Lindsay Kemp, the People's Show, Ben Benison. It was just so much stuff, and we were encouraged. In fact, I remember Emil taking us all for one workshop. One of the class members was a trained and had the badge for being a tour guide. So, okay, great. So we worked out just a couple of silly little acrobatic statue kind of things to do. And we went off and did things like running through the National Gallery. And the best way of seeing a Turner is all on your head. So we'd all be standing on our heads going up there. People were actually joining this tour, and we were on the run the whole time, just, you know, overplaying that way that tourists go, oh yeah, and then take photographs here, and then getting into a pyramid on top of Eros and stuff. I mean, you know, it was so much more innovative in those days somehow, you know, workshop situations. Yeah.
Mm.
Maybe
I've
that's
just got a question coming in from Ben Cornish, Chris, about, and it's interesting that you talked about Keaton, Buster Keaton, as being an inspiration for you, because of course we all know from the history books that Buster Keaton was beaten by his father, and how that related to you being beaten in the boarding school. And do you think that how Ben Cornish puts it is this, is that being punished and being in trouble, we get a taste for it and take it into performance? Do you think that's where your power as a clown comes from?
That's a tough one, actually, to really think about. I mean, I think, you see, I don't see those things as punishment. I just see them as inevitable. You know, I mean, I injure myself on a kind of daily basis. And to me, it's the inevitability of going to brush your teeth. You're going to scratch your finger on the door. And, you know, there's always some little thing to go, ow, bing, knock your elbow. Constant all through my life. So I just wonder whether that, you know, I think everybody's got a clown in them, actually. It's just so, you know, I actually made a conscious decision one morning that that's what I want to do. I want to make people laugh. And so I've just pursued that, you know, as I've got older. In fact, only my last piece that we created has gone anywhere for turning left on that field of just going, okay, let's just explore the misery and the tragedy of life as well. So, and that's been really interesting to explore. But yeah, that was it. Make people laugh. That was the idea.
I think you've talked about this quite a lot, about Duncan Cameron has asked us about towing the line, and have you noticed a difference of where the line is and has it moved? And I think you've talked about the early days, the exploration that was possible, the extremes of performing in the street. Have you noticed the line of what's acceptable or not acceptable moving over time?
Yeah. I think I'm pretty sure that's, well, it might be the age as well. Why I struggle to get gigs now, and it's because bookers and promoters are frightened of booking me, because they don't want anything that might step across the line, that might be construed as unsafe, might be risque, or might upset some punters. There's not many promoters and bookers now who relish that. I mean, Campbell was probably the last director who had that that mischievous naughtiness that is thrilling. Audiences get thrilled by that stuff. And the only time, well, I don't go to the theatre a lot anymore, but One Man, Two Governors had some really great anarchic slapstick in it, and I think that people like Cal McChrystal can, if you let certain people out on a modern play, then you'll be able to get away with a certain amount of stuff. But yeah, I think the safety aspect has become huge, really.
Yeah. Chris, I just want to ask you, can you talk a little bit more about Ken Campbell and those early experiences? Because we've had a couple of questions about him, and also I just think people are really, you speak as if everyone's heard of Ken Campbell, but only people of a certain age have heard of him. So I think maybe talk a little bit about that experience. That'd be great.
Yeah, I was fortunate I met him, I was working at the Roundhouse soon after I got into clowning, but I still held down a couple of, like, being a bartender. I was a bartender at the Roundhouse, which was, so that was in '73. So they were still having quite phenomenal gigs there. And in fact, I think one of the early gigs I saw there, this was probably influential, actually, Grand Magic Circus.
Oh, yeah.
So that was the first time I'd seen something really with good, strong French clowning, and using midgets and fat guys throwing people around, and really exploring the comic possibilities from that kind of European traditional clown school. And Campbell used to come and sit out there, and then he wanted to do some show. What was it? It was he was going to put on what's it called? Chris Langham was in it. It was a kind of science fiction thing, one of his early big science fiction shows. Ben, you probably know that, Ben Keaton. What was that show Ken did with Langham in it? Anyway, he wanted me to be in it, and I couldn't, but I said, but my mate here, he's just trained as an actor, and it was Chris Fairbanks. And
Illuminatus. Illuminatus.
Yeah, that was it. And God, memory. Actually, I need to write about that as well. And so I introduced them, and it went on to be really quite a successful piece. I think they took it up to Liverpool and everything, and an artist. And so that's where I first met Ken, was just through that. And he lived in a squat just further up Haverstock Hill, which was part of a collection of squats. There were like 5 houses in a row, and just full of artists and actors. And Ken had this great little kind of stably apartment there, and we used to have mad rehearsals and soirees and gatherings and play readings and all kinds of stuff there. So I got quite friendly with him more on a personal level before I started working with him. I think the first time I worked with him was, I'm not sure if I'm getting the order right here. The Third Policeman, I think, was before the war. So he got some money from the Irish to put on Flann O'Brien's Third Policeman, and that was just phenomenal. Oh my God, the book is worth reading, and the play was just, he had this great ruse to, he was struggling to get us to do Irish accents. So I kind of go, no, you haven't got it. He was, Ken Campbell was a ferocious, he had these big bushy eyebrows, and super intelligent, super trained, incredibly eclectic and amazing with words, a real wordsmith, and ideas, always ready to explore the other side or something new or something different. So after about a week of rehearsals, or a 3-week period, he got, nobody's getting these Irish accents. Right, Irving, isn't my friend Irving? It was Dave Rappaport's brother. Do you know Dave Rappaport? He was a little guy.
Yeah,
He
I
was
knew
a
him.
small guy.
Well, met him a couple of times. Yeah.
I think he was quite big in a couple of films. Time Bandits he did, yeah, and then he moved to Hollywood and it all went tits up for him. But he was a fantastic musician too. So anyway, Dave Rappaport's brother Irving was a dental laboratory worker guy there. So he came in and took all of our impressions and made us all a set of false teeth. Boom! Suddenly everyone had an Irish accent. It was just phenomenal. I keep thinking, well, how did he know that? I mean, maybe through putting cardboard in his mouth, or, mucking about at night with some, because he was very playful, Ken. I mean, he loved to play and kind of, yeah, phenomenal guy. He did that. Then The Warp, I mean, that was, I'm really sorry he didn't get more recognition in his life, actually. There was a moment where he was up for the director of the national job and the other bloke got it. And there was a big loss because he was so inventive, so innovative, and so ready to experiment and try something new and invariably successful. I mean, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Oh, what should we do with that? He thought it was shit. So I know, we'll make it interesting. We'll take the audience around the ICA on hydraulic seats. So this whole seating thing used to just lift up and go around. And yeah, phenomenal. Yeah.
I'm going to tell you something, a little story from my own past.
Okay.
The Grand Magic Circus that you mentioned at the
Roundhouse, yeah.
the Roundhouse. Circus Oz started partly because of the Grand Magic Circus. We were inspired by their poster. We've never seen them. I've seen a little bit on YouTube in the past years or so, but at the time we just were so impressed by the idea that someone could do a contemporary circus, and Circus Oz started partly because of that. So we were inspired by the same people, Chris.
Oh, well done. Yeah. No, they were phenomenal. God. You kind of wish that something like that was still happening somehow. Well, it is, I suppose. Yeah. So, I mean, Circus Oz is still going, isn't it?
Yes, it is still going, and it's just down the road.
Oh, really?
Walking distance from where I am.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk to you. Well, someone's asked about practice and training being necessary for the clown, and I wanted you've mentioned practice and training in terms of acrobatics and in terms of the workshop festival that you did at Kennington and so on at the Oval. But have your training as a clown, I think, is pretty much. Can you talk about that? About whether you went for training or you just invented it from your own personality itself?
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, I always look on it as a blessing that I didn't raise the money to go to Lecoq School, because I've seen quite a few of the people who come out of that school, and I don't think the wild anarchic character I've got would have developed at Lecoq. That kind of anarchy would have been squashed, I think, pretty early on, just from the people I've seen who've come out of there. I think Django went there, and I think did Nola go there, or she went to one of those kind of schools? Yeah. But I've seen a few people who've come out of that school and pretty uninspired stuff. So training-wise, I think it was just getting on and doing it, really. Just the thrill of the street. Every time you do a show, you learn something new. So the street was my main school, really. And then working with all these different great people over my career, I've been very lucky, to come into contact with that era, that period where Fringe theatre was supported, by the Arts Council and stuff. So it was quite easy to get money in the 70s and 80s. I suppose it's as easy now, but you had to have the dedicated person who knew how to write the letter and fill in the right boxes and say the right things to get money, you know. So. Mm.
Well, that's very interesting. You've talked a little bit about your, what did you call him? A wild anarchic character that you developed as a clown.
Mm.
And something that's come up a lot in discussion over the last couple of weeks has been androgynousness or the sex of the clown. And I want you to talk about now about your clowning, which is completely not androgynous. You're completely a male, hairy, smelly, lascivious kind of character, that an eccentric character, but clearly a clown. But do you have any thoughts about sex and clowning and whether the two are related, or can you talk about that?
That's really unfair. I'm really upset. I'm really hurt. The fact that you've never seen Betty Beattie from the Betty Beattie School of Better Batter Beating.
Betty Beattie?
Yes. She's Betty Beattie from the Betty Beattie School of Better Batter Beating. And Lala is another female character I do. Both very sexy women in their own way. But it's kind of taking, yeah, it's clowning up a female character. So it's a female character. So I feel that I can, you know, God, the ballerina, Master Cough in the Ditch, that's, you know, I go into a big brown paper bag as a, from Middle Europe somewhere, magician guy, and burst out after 10 seconds in a ballerina costume and do some ballet with a blonde wig on and, you know, dance ballet with my partner who I've got out. So, you know, I have an aspect of androgyny in me, I think.
Oh, that's very interesting that you say that, because I would say that your ballerina character that I've, you know, seen is that comes out of the paper bag and so on, is clearly a man dressed as a woman. You're clowning as a
You see, funny thing about this business is, you know, you can get, perhaps with me, I just fool myself that the person who comes out of that bag is a really sexy ballerina. And yes, sometimes when I do look at it, I go, no. Okay, yeah, I'm pretty butch.
Well, talk about sex then. Talk about your character, your eccentric character that you play when you're clowning. Clearly, is a lascivious bloke. There's a you know, you in the way that for example, Harpo Marx is lascivious. He's a clown. He's an androgynous clown, but clearly he's chasing after women a lot of the time. And you make gestures, and there's a kind of your sexual in your behavior.
My old school stuff. I think I used to be a lot more flirtatious and lewd when I was younger. I've kind of grown out of it a bit. Definitely. I mean, I used to be that off stage as well. In fact, my whole clown character used to be pretty much the same on and off stage. You know, it was this wild person. And I tend to, for the last 30 years, have kept it mainly on stage, really. And occasionally goes out. But it's because it's exhausting otherwise. I mean, Django still is just exhausting. To go to a restaurant with him, it's just like you have to watch this clown fucking about the whole time, and it really does. I prefer having the break from it, you know, and keeping things a bit more low key, unless it's on a stage. Then
talk about your experiences with Django a little bit, because I'm sure everyone's very interested in that.
No, they're not great actually. I worked with him. I mean, obviously, I knew who he was early days. His early days stuff was phenomenal. What he did for opening clown up to the world was quite phenomenal. The Festival of Fools, which ran for quite a few years, I think. I mean, was quite a phenomenal event. And quite soon after I started, I met Friends Roadshow England. So he had two Friends Roadshow companies, one in the UK, which was about 15 to 20 people, and one was in Amsterdam. the same, and he used to come over and play with them. So there was a lot of gig swapping, and in those days there was a lot of kind of country fairs and festivals that were pretty innovative for the times. You know, I was recently reminded of Barsham Horse Fair, and that was an annual event that the whole fair had no electricity, and fantastic people used to come and play there, and the whole thing had a again, it's that, yeah, no, those were good times. Django, then I actually worked with him once in 1976. We did a gig on the bus. Some of the English friends came over, and we did a gig in Copenhagen at Christiana, in the big grey hall there. And I was kind of disappointed, because I think unless you're a big mate of his, you kind of don't work with Django. There's a few people he does work with, but you know, he'll give you a little walk-on part, and yeah, so I've never gained any respect from him, and yeah, it kind of doesn't bother me, because I appreciate the influence that he's had on our world, you know, which has been quite phenomenal, really.
Mm. Can you talk a little bit now about the audiences and how they've changed over time? You've talked a lot about performing in the 70s and the 80s as being the genesis of your clown. And I suppose there's a number of questions that we have on the Q&A, and also I'm interested to know how you found audiences have changed over the time that you've been clowning.
I think the only real noticeable thing I've got is that, you know, the onslaught of the digital age has made people a lot less, their concentration lapse time is not as long, you know. It's quite hard work for people to sit and watch a 40-minute show now on the street. It has been quite phenomenal, and you know, it almost has to be that formulaic system to hold people's attention, and possibly that I haven't seen. I don't go out a lot to looking for it, but I haven't noticed too many real innovative street performers anymore that I feel that I'd want to sit and watch. So they've all got this mobile phone, and quite often they're more interested in taking a photo or a little video, a clip of it, and then going, oh yeah, we saw this artist in Covent Garden, or we saw this guy at this festival, or whatever it is. But they're not really watching it anymore on the street. And I think in the theatres as well, it's that, yeah, I was going to say that they haven't got the time to watch a gag get set up more, but that's not entirely true. I think it depends on where. So have they changed? I don't know, actually. I think possibly more to the point is our perception of the audience has changed. You know, they're actually the same. They're a bunch of people who come out fresh faced to go shopping or go to the theatre to see whatever it is. But because we've been doing it for that amount of time, possibly a bit jaded, possibly know what's expected of them, and so yeah.
That's interesting, Chris. I'm going to push you a little bit further about this. Have you changed what you do in terms of the audience, in terms of how you interact with the audience, or are you aware as a clown of playing to a different audience now?
Yeah, there's some sketches for sure that have had to kind of be adjusted, and some even get buried, you know, because of the PC aspects that we have to adhere to. That's debatable as well. I'm not sure if I really want to go into that, because I get into trouble when I start talking about being allowed to or not allowed to do PC stuff, because I believe clowns can do whatever they want. But I have quite a few arguments with close friends and associates about that. Yeah, I think, you know, I was just jotting it up. I've been involved in and created about 23 shows in my career, and the most recent one, which was 5 years ago, was I think my best work, and it's me, silent, white face, really miserable, really sad, phenomenal music. Can't sell it, but it's just a fantastic piece of work, Eric the Fred. And and that was the first time I've really spent quite a lot of time. Now, it took us a few years to build it, and it was with a specific thing in mind of trying to make me more acceptable to an audience. You know, get away from the knocking. And you know, we put quite a few, implemented quite a few things to make that happen. Like I put a fourth wall in, I put a gauze down, and we projected onto that, and so I can't go and touch the audience. Not speaking, so you know that's swearing and half of my abuse out the window. And it's a really lovely piece, but yeah, can't say it, and it did money easy.
I've only seen Eric the Fred on video. I haven't seen it live, but it really surprised me that you were doing such a classic clown. And it interests me that you were trying to make yourself acceptable, and in fact, the work was less. It hasn't been booked that often.
Yeah.
So can you just elucidate that a little bit more? Can you talk a bit more about Eric the Fred and how it's sold or not sold, or why? Why? Do you know why?
Yeah, because you know, unless you've got a manager or agent in whichever regions that you want to work in, making it happen for you, it's very difficult to sell yourself now, unless you've built up enough of a name in the future. Then, but even still, I think anybody who's getting gigs these days, it's not them. It's, you know, you need the Glynis Hendersons really, or the
I'm sorry, I don't know who Glynis Henderson is. You can tell me.
manager Stomp.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And you know, I think in the early days she managed me as well, and Paul Morocco and Ennio Marchetto and stuff like that. And I think the only one she's kept in her stable is Ennio, because he's easy. You know, Paul Morocco's fits kind of into the same bracket as I do. It's like, oh, upsets people.
Mm. I'm going to talk about a couple of comments that I've observed you make, which is that you've become less lascivious, less flirtatious with the audience as you've got older. Whereas I find the opposite, that actually being an older woman has freed me to be really flirtatious with the audience, because it's so ridiculous. It's become a ridiculous place to be flirtatious with the audience. And that's really interesting, because there's been quite a lot of conversation over the last few weeks about women clowns and men, and male clown and the female clown and the androgynous. And do you what I'm trying to ask you about, and your comments today about the old days and currently, there's been a shift, I think, in perceptions of clowns just at the time when it's become impossible to clown. To be a genuine disruptor has become both culturally unacceptable, and also there's the gatekeepers, the promoters who promote venues and gigs, are perhaps more conservative. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yes, and when you were talking about, you know, I think it's great that as you've got older, you find that you can be more, and I think that is a gender thing. I mean, look at Mookie is another example of female clown who is, I mean, she kind of pushes the gender thing quite a lot, and plays on it rather well, I thought. Yeah, I think quite a bit of my calming down is age as well, and you know, snipping bits of material. I mean, I still do some of my sketches are 35 years old, you know.
Yeah.
But, you know, I've got over 4.5 hours of material, but it's the stuff that tends to get booked easily. If I can get a booking, it's usually for Beast of the Theatre, which is my kind of the what's come out of my early street characters, really. Yeah.
Was that was Beast of the Theatre the first show, like an internal interior venue based show that you made?
No. Before that, I'd done quite a few. I worked with another guy, Johnny Plummer. Actually, he's Amsterdam. He was with Friends Roadshow, and we got a double act together. That was called Nomads and Fools. And so then Nomads and Fools has had a few different configurations. I think once it was like 7 people or something. So that was the name of a show that got sold to festivals, and we did a couple of theatre gigs with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Chris, can you talk a little bit about the collaboration that you've had with various people over time? Because you've talked a lot about your development as a solo performer, which is fantastic. But clearly you've mentioned a lot of people that you've collaborated with as a performer and also directors. Is there someone, well, talk about them and talk about maybe the collaborators as a performer as well as a director.
Yeah. There's a really great writer I worked with on a few different projects. His name was Paddy Fletcher, and he was with a group called, he was one of the early fringe theatre companies that I told you about. Incubus was his company.
Oh, yeah.
And we wrote a piece together because we used to hang out every now and then, go and visit him for ideas on a sketch, or he got into writing quite a lot for tellies and adverts and all kinds of stuff. And we decided that we should do a piece where it was called Chris Lynam is Lord Byron, Mad, Bad and Dangerous to Know. So he wrote that, and it was just fantastic. So here's a bit of the tragedy of my career, where through not having an agent manager, we've written and produced and put on and had good audiences and good press to a piece that went to Edinburgh for the full 3 weeks, played in the assembly rooms, one of the rooms, got good everything, but did 1 week after that in a tiny little theatre up in Crouch End. So that's it. So you've done all that work, had a great writer, and the script is still there. I had a look at the artwork and everything. It was just phenomenal. But, no manager, no agent, nobody going, yeah, boom, We had the same thing with Eric the Fred, where we did it in Edinburgh. We took it up there. And there's like 5, I mean, it's a one-man show, but I've got 5 technicians working on it. And so there were 6 of us up in Edinburgh. I think it cost us 30 grand or something to do it. And because I hadn't been to Edinburgh for a few years and didn't realize that theatre doesn't play in the evening anymore. If you want to see people to see a theatre show, you've got to play it in the afternoon, because they all go, they have one gin and tonic and then they're off to bed or whatever. I don't know what the story was, but anyway, we got no one into it. And so, I mean, yes and no. We played it at quite a few international festivals. And that's had a good life, actually. But it's, a show like that, you want to play it 50 or 100 times a year, really, to get it's one of the few pieces that I really want people to see of my work, and
I think maybe Jackson's Lane in Crouch End is that the venue that you played? But I wanted Susie Maxwell Stewart has asked, do you believe that the more creative you are, the less money you earn in performance as a clown? And that's what you've been saying. So maybe elucidate that a little bit.
Yeah, well, perhaps it's time to get back on the street, because that was the wealthiest and happiest time, I mean, I don't know what it's like in terms of authorities and actually getting gigs now, but you know what? I can't really complain about money, because you know, when this virus nonsense kicked in, I was in the middle of a tour in Russia. I worked with Slava Snow Show quite a bit, for between 3 and 5 months a year. And boom, everything just shut down. And in fact, the whole world has just shut down. It's phenomenal. So that's kind of encouraged us to do these kind of things. And the online shows with, yeah, I did one in your town a couple of weeks ago, the Varietyville. So there's the digital world is opening up a bit again. And who knows, I think there is, well, I'm going to go out looking for some money, Sue, about, you know, with a trio of musicians and just stand, maybe we'll stand just less than 2 meters apart or something. I don't know. I suppose you can't really joke yet about this whole virusy thing, but it doesn't bother me, to tell you the truth, if I got it or not. I don't care.
Yeah.
The death is here always, right there.
Musicians have it easier though, because they don't swap things. They don't do objects that change hands. For example, if you're collaborating with a group of musicians, you can stand 1.5 meters away and have an instrument in your hand and not infect anybody.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. No, I look forward to that. Again, one of my troubles is I always want more stuff. So, you know, I play 8 instruments, and the largest is implement sousaphone. So carrying those kind of things around, it's like, oh, need a van.
Ben Cornish wants to know if you're still playing the ukulele.
Ben, I never played the ukulele, but I've got a tenor banjo I play, and a mandolin.
That's very good. You make a living, I think. Well, I that's what I've drawn from your website, by doing Slava's Snow Show. Can you talk a little bit about how it feels as a clown to do other people's material, or is that what you're doing in Slava's Snow Show, or are you making? Is there space for you to be inventive in your own right?
Yeah, I've brought quite a bit into that show, and in fact, I'm probably one of the only clowns that doesn't really fit. And that's probably because I've known Slava for years, 35 years. We first met in a clown festival in Montreux, which was an extraordinary event. I think it was their first trip out of Russia. And he came there there were 4 of them, I think, from Litzerday, his first group. And the 5 artists for this festival were Django, Leo Bassi, me, Slava, and Gustave Parking, who's a French clown who went on to do great things, actually. God, man, what an inventive guy. He was the guy who started pay what you want quite early on. I think that must have been in the 80s. I've lost touch with him now. I think he made piles of money and went to live on an island in the Caribbean or something. So I feel like I haven't answered the question. I've diverted, but I can't remember what the question was.
Well, I was asking about Slava's Snow Show and where you
So that's where we met in
okay.
mid 80s, and then we met at another festival in Limburg, and then they asked me to come and do a boat of fools or something that was going to be in Moscow, and the dates didn't fit. And then there was the Django, Slava and a Polish group organized a thing called the Mir Caravan, and Footspan. And that was a phenomenal event. I mean, it started in, I forget the name of the town, some French town, and it was like 30 groups or something. It was phenomenal. And all on the road, went through France, Belgium, into Holland, across to Poland, and ended up in Russia. I think the whole thing took 6 months. Near caravan apiece, and it was all just clowns and theatre people. And they asked me to come on that as well, but 6 months not earning my kind of money. I was earning so much money on the street, so I became a bit of a capitalist and went. But then they moved to England, Slava did, and he used to come and see my shows. We used to meet up. He used to come to he came, I think they was living in tiny little flats and stuff. And he had two kids. His kids were slightly older than mine. And they used to come for Christmas lunch and stuff. And so we just became friendly. And then they asked me to come and play. It's fantastic. When you sleep, Slava doesn't really speak English. I mean, he can, but he doesn't. He gets Elena, his wife, to speak most of the time. Slava would like you to come and study main green and main yellow. What do you think? So, you know, yeah, I ended up trying it out one night, and first show I did something that has become into, you know, it's been put into the show. There's quite a few bits that I'll improvise and do that suddenly become part of the show. They're quite limited because you know, it has to fit in with that kind of style of character. It's very particular characters really in it. And I kind of am the only one who has a bit of freedom to be anarchic, you know, because they're kind of quite blank, the green clowns. They don't really want to affect too much.
And yeah, yeah. I'm just going to ask you, Chris, is that because you succeeded? You improvised and that was successful and therefore incorporated in the show? Or is there something about your personal relationship with Slava that enables you to do that?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, my personal relationship, he's got a bit more distance from all the people as he's got older, you know, he doesn't tour with them so much. And he's quite busy for a few, I think what changed him a bit was he got, he became the director of the St. Petersburg Circus, which was quite a prestigious thing. I think in the same year he got like an MBE, or, you know, the Russian equivalent. He got some medal thing, and you're a proper bloke. And he's kind of distanced himself, and I don't think that the circus was very successful for him. He wanted to, you know, he wanted to bring some Cirque du Soleil style influence in on it and get rid of 300-year-old traditions of having that family of bears doing the, you know. And he was going, we've got to be contemporary and stuff. And I don't think it sat too well. So he's finished his contract, but only just, I think.
Yeah, great. I just want to ask you a kind of combined question from a lot of people who've been interested and asking questions through Q&A. Do you think that you've talked a lot about starting in the 70s and 80s, Chris, and how freewheeling and on the street and open, and that there was a fantastic time for your development as a performer. Do you think that those times have gone for good, or are they coming back now that maybe the perception of what's possible as a clown is different from what it was in those days?
I think, yeah, I mean, I think, you know, Matey, the clown has always mutated, usually before what's acceptable, you know, as the clowns that kind of lead the way. They've always, you know, the court jester, the fool, there's always been somebody to make fun of the situation. So I'm really looking forward to see how this changes, actually. I mean, I'm enjoying the rest. I hope it carries on for another couple of months because I need to really recuperate. But I feel fired up and ready to go. Try something new, you know. That's what we do as well, the clowns. You can't keep a clown down, really. I mean, we don't retire, do we? Fuck, yeah, you do, but you're in a box. Or
well, the older we get, the better we get, isn't it? Isn't that true? Well, it's in traditional circus, old acrobats become clowns.
Yeah, no, maybe I failed somehow in that department, because if you get better, then you shouldn't struggle to get bloody gigs, surely, really.
Well, struggling to get gigs is part of getting older, I think.
Any book, please take my number.
I'm just going to, we're coming up to 7 o'clock, which is 7 o'clock my time in Australia here in the morning. I'm just reminding everyone who's listening that Patreon is a so go to Patreon and donate to Zoological, ZOOLOGICAL, if you want to support the ongoing analysis of clowning in the new world. And Chris, I want to say thank you very much for sharing and talking to us. We're going to stay live for another half hour or so if anyone wants to stay. And we want, I'm reading off notes at the moment. So if you can stay, Chris, that would be great, because I'm sure there's a lot of people who want to talk to you directly. And over to Sasha, a special thank you. Oh, that's what I have to say. A special thank you to Sasha and Dave Spathaki, who make these sessions possible. And we're going to close in now or shortly. But we'll stay online. So Sasha, if you can unmute everyone, that'd be great. And questions and answers can be verbalized instead of typed.